if you're a health practitioner, you got into this because you wanted to help people, right? You really wanted to be there and help them to get their health back and be as healthy as possible and be as happy as possible. But it doesn't always work that way, because a lot of the tools that you learned if you went through traditional medical training, like nursing school, medical school, physician's assistant school, etc., fell short of teaching you how to help people get and stay well. It taught you a lot about how to help people in crisis, how to help people when they're in the middle of a heart attack, how to help people when they need is an ambulance or some sort of, care that's very aligned with keeping them alive, right? And so you got great tools for keeping people alive, but not great tools for keeping people healthy and happy. And one of the things that bothers me is every day I hear stories from people, from clients, from colleagues that talk about medical atrocities, basically things that are done like they told you what, they told you to do what, they told you to take what, and in reality, it's not going to really help them heal. And this is one of the worst medical atrocities I've seen. Some of you have seen, I posted this picture before. This little girl was admitted into the hospital because she was exhibiting signs of diabetic acidosis, ketoacidosis, and she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. She's 18 months old. You can see all the things that are attached to her. And this is what they fed her in the hospital. This girl was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. What's wrong with this picture? She's eating macaroni and cheese, sweetened Yoplait yogurt, and applesauce. There's not a lick of fresh food on there. Those are all foods that are going to shoot her sugars up, make her need more insulin, and ruin her life. This is the kind of medical atrocities that contribute to why I do what I do, why I'm on a mission to help us just completely transform our broken system from a medical care system, a disease care system or disease management system, to a system that is truly healthcare, because this little girl deserves it, and so does everybody else out there. So I want you to be the heroes in your patients' and clients' life. I want you to be the one that comes up with those ideas for them, those lifestyle strategies, those diet strategies, nutritional strategies, exercise strategies, all of the above that help them to truly get well, so that you're truly taking care of people. I love doing what I do, and I love teaching practitioners. I've been doing it for a long time. This is a picture of one of our last live events that was in person several years ago, 2018 or 19, one or the other, probably 19. And then we started to do online events more online because of, guess what? Because of the pandemic. And then last year we had our first one in person again. But I found that more people have access when we do events like this, longer events than this. We never do shorter than this because I can't not talk a lot. So they're never shorter than this, but longer events than this online. So you could do it in your pajamas from your living room and don't have to get in a car, especially people like Ritika, who has little kids. And I'm sure a lot of you do, or ailing parents or whatever. And it's not easy to travel. So this is me teaching, and I love teaching practitioners. I also love teaching the public about how they can take care of themselves. And I've amassed so many degrees and so many certifications, too many to add, but I feel like we should always be learning. So every time I do a presentation, some of these presentations I could do in my sleep, but I always go out to see what is the latest research that I can add to inspire you to really take some good action. So today we have an agenda, and I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to necessarily go through this in the order it's listed. It's a little bit more organic and flowy than that. But the first thing is I want you to be able to understand the genetic markers related to estrogen metabolism and how they relate to dietary recommendations that you make people. How to use these findings to motivate and empower people. And here's what I find. I can talk till I'm blue in the face, telling people to avoid this, eat that, try this, try that. And they go, yeah, that all sounds good. We can show them on paper that their genetics are going to predispose them to a certain condition if they don't do the things that I tell them to do. The ears perk up. It's one of the most motivating factors around. Lab tests are second only to the genetics. So that's the things I do. The other thing is the genetic markers related to estrogen. When you understand estrogen metabolism and you understand how the genetic markers fit into that metabolism and what kind of things you can do to help people prevent the manifestations of that. We're going to talk about epigenetics in just a little bit. We're going to look at the tests that you might want to do when somebody has some of these genetic predispositions to see if those predispositions are actually playing out. You don't have to do tests. I'll talk about when and why to do tests. We're going to talk about that. And then finally, we're going to talk about using nutrigenomics and lab testing to create programs for people, whether it's one-on-one or whether you're doing it in a group, that help them to restore their health. How does that sound in terms of an agenda? Big order, lots of stuff. Let's jump in. So this is a repeat. We are genetically so much alike, all of us together. We're even 98.5% similar to this guy, and he doesn't even look like us except he has arms and legs and a head, right? But we are 99.5% the same as each other. And look how different we are on the outside. Inside, there are differences like that too. But genetically, we're 99.5% the same. And that's beyond me. When we look at genetic variations, some people call them mutations. I don't like that term. We're not mutated. We're just varying. We look different. You have blue eyes, I have brown eyes. Doesn't mean I'm mutated. Maybe it means you're mutated. No, neither one of us is mutated. We're just different. It's differences. Some of them make us have a faster processing, like say in the caffeine metabolism gene, and some make us go slow. And some of them, you don't know. Because until we look at how that person responds, sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast. It's not always the same. And this is what I'm talking about. When you get a report, you're going to see most of the reports are going to show you something like this. And this is just randomly some of the detoxification SNPs. Green means mom and dad both gave you the expected gene there. Yellow means one of them gave you a gene that was variant. And then red means both of them did, right? And when we have these variants and we're looking at pathways in the body, it doesn't mean if you have red that you're not going to do that function at all. It just means it's going to be reduced. And generally speaking, it's reduced, somewhere in the 75 to 80% reduction with red. Somewhere in the 40%-ish with yellow. And then with green, it's whatever it is. But it's not just the genes that determine how well the pathways work. You can't underestimate the power of epigenetics because this saying goes, the genes load the gun, the lifestyle pulls the trigger. So you can have a mess of genes that predispose you to stuff. But if your lifestyle's pristine, your exposures are pristine, you meditate, you sleep, you eat well, you exercise, you do all the right things, good chance that you're not going to fall prey to that. And there's some additional things based on those specific genes that you can do to protect yourself in that particular pathway. Okay. So yes, and you see this is a strand. It's the outer wrapping that goes around the genes that tell it whether to turn on or turn off. I'll share with you another one. Don't get a headache from it, but this is what it kind of looks like. We have the DNA strands and we have these histones that create the epigenetics. And when you are eating a certain way, drinking a certain way, being exposed to certain things, you can turn on or off specific genes. And that's enough said. We could do a whole 2-hour talk on the whole epigenetics process. Reality, and this varies from who you read, but somewhere in the 85 to 95%. Bruce Lipton says 98% is controlled by the environment. Only a little tiny percent. It varies from one person to the next. It varies from the particular genes. These are all the things that we have control over. These are all the things that you can counsel your patients on. Nobody learned this in medical school. Nobody taught you in medical school to tell people to, meditate. I accidentally hit the button on my thing and knocked out my, all right, so let me say slideshow from current slide. There we go. Can you still see it? Yeah, okay, good. All these things matter. You didn't learn this in medical school. If you went to naturopathic school, you probably learned this stuff. If you went to a nutrition school, you probably learned this stuff, but you didn't get the details of why, right? That's what we're going to do. We're going to marry the lifestyle factors with the why so you can explain it to people and they're more likely to do something about it, all right? There is no one size fits all. There is no one size fits all health plan. And we try to do it. And there are some tests out there that will say that, let me go back a second. Something is not right. Oh, I see what happened when I let it go. My screen didn't get split. Okay. When we try to fit everybody into a mold, when we try to say, okay, here's the right diet. Is it macrobiotics? Is it keto? Is it vegan? Is it Mediterranean? You get the idea. There's no one size that works for all the same way as there's no one size sneaker size, even if the average sneaker size for us, like say they polled all of us and found out that the average shoe size is 6.5. We get a bunch of pairs of shoes. How many people are on here? A couple hundred people, 150 people. We get that many pairs of shoes. The majority of us are not going to fit into those shoes, right? Because it just doesn't work that way. Same way with jeans. If you're looking at a company that's doing hey, we'll test your genes and we're going to give you this custom nutrition supplement program based on your genes, it doesn't work. I had a conversation about that with Dr. Ben Lynch, who is going to be teaching at our event in June. But I said to him, what are your feelings about that? He says, if I believed that that could work, I could be very rich because I run the reports and I have a company that sells supplements. I could just say, okay, we just looked at your report. Here's the supplements, and people would buy it because they trust them. He goes, no way, it doesn't work that way. So he would never do that. So all kinds of things, herbs and foods and lifestyle, it's all going to be a custom piece. There's some basic tenets, but then there's others. So we're going to go into how is estrogen metabolized. We're going to look at how is it synthesized and how is it metabolized and the various genes that get involved in these pathways so you can understand. And I highly recommend, if you see a slide you like, is to go ahead and take a screenshot of it. This was from a company called Genetic Life Hacks. And I haven't used their service for loading up my genes, but I liked their pictures. So they did a nice job of it. And you can upload your 23andMe data to them and they put out reports. So it just came across my radar recently and I'm going to check it out. So we have estrogen, right? Estrogen comes from cholesterol. The bad guy that we're always taking statins to try to lower, it's not a bad guy. It's a precursor to your estrogens and your sex hormones and also your cortisol and your adrenal hormones. So cholesterol via this specific pathway, which is coded by a gene, gets produced to pregnenolone. The pregnenolone can go to progesterone or DHEA, but all roads lead to getting down into estrogen. And you're going to recognize some of these. We're going to talk about some of these in a moment, some of these little snips. So this is how estrogen is eliminated. This is the big picture view, and then we're going to go into a more detailed view. These are some of the genes that are these are enzymes, cytochrome P450 enzymes, part of the liver that detoxify things. These particular ones have a role in taking the estrogens and breaking them into metabolites so that they're ready for elimination. So we have phase 1, they get produced into these metabolites, and then The phase 2 will get rid of them and get them set up for excretion. So these are the genes, CYP1A1, 1B1, 3A4, 1A2. They had left this one off, so I had to add this one back in. If you see that, it looks like it's funny looking. I had to play around with it and add it back in. So then phase 2, the methylation pathway and the sulfation pathway are both involved with the breakdown of estrogen. And they use things like COMT, UGTs, glutathione S-transferase, P1 and M1. Those are all involved with getting rid of them, getting them into a place where they can be excreted in the intestines. But depending on how good your microbiome is, if your microbiome isn't working properly, then there's this enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, and it is created, it's inhibited by certain microbes, and it's enhanced by certain microbes, right? And we can use a supplement called calcium D-glucarate to inhibit that beta-glucuronidase, because what happens is it takes all these great products that are all set being released, it turns them back into estrogen, which can create a situation of estrogen dominance. And estrogen dominance is not a good situation to be in. And then this is a little bit more detailed. So we have estrogen. We always talk about estrogen. The public talks about estrogen, but in fact, there's 3 major estrogens. There's a 4th one, which is really inactive, which is an estrogen sulfate. But estrone, estradiol, and estriol, those are the main ones, and those are over here. There's estrone is E1, estradiol is E2, and estriol is E3. Estrone and estradiol are very proliferative, so they can cause the growth of endometrial tissue, of breast tissue, non-cancerous breast cysts. So they cause growth, whereas estriol, E3, Dr. Jonathan Wright always calls it the forgotten estrogen. It's a protective one. So we want to move this in the, the direction of estriol being equal to or greater than estrone plus estradiol. That's called the estrogen quotient. We'll look at that in a moment when we look at some of the testing that we can do here. Okay, so the estradiol gets converted into estrone, can go 2 ways, and then using these pathways, CYP1A1, 1B1 gets converted into some of these metabolites, okay? And this is the CYP3A4. Converted into 2-hydroxyestrone, which is protective. You see the happy face? And then COMT is another catecholamine methyltransferase, can convert that into a methylated form. Protection, you're not going to get sick from this. You're not going to get breast cancer from having too much 2-OH. But if you have 4-OH, it's the most proliferative. It creates these quinones, which are DNA damager. It could be with the COMT, if there's enough activity there, converted into the methylated. So when we do some testing, I'll show you the testing that I like. We want to look at not just how much estriol is there, how much estrone is there, how much estriol is there, all 3. We also want to look at the metabolites because it's important. And then we have 16, which probably should have kind of a part happy, part sad face, because that's one that we want some of because it helps protect bones, but we don't want to have too much of it. So it can be DNA damaging. So I'll show you what those numbers should look like. And then when you create these quinones, we need to go through another pathway with glutathione to help break those down. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because the next picture gets a little more complicated. So now what I want to do is pull some of this together and show you not just the genetic factors and the metabolites, but some of the diet and lifestyle factors that can help support us going to the preferred pathways. So we have estrone, estradiol, CYP1A2 will convert estrone to estradiol, and then it will also convert estradiol down into methoxy, the methylated. CYP1A2 is the detoxifier of 85 to 90% of all caffeine that comes in your body. So guess what might happen if you have caffeine coming in all the time, and that pathway needs to work on the caffeine because that's an external toxin coming in versus the estrogen, which is just there all the time. Some of that activity gets diverted to detoxifying the caffeine and less energy, if you want to call it energy, available to help with the conversion of the estrogens to the more helpful forms. Now, if you have genetic variants in this particular SNP, CYP1A2, you can have a lower threshold for getting rid of the caffeine. You can also have a lower threshold for getting the estrogens detoxified. So one of the things you can do or advise your clients to do is avoid caffeine or minimize caffeine if they have this SNP. But the other thing that you can do is help to support these pathways as we look down to see these green and red things. So anything that's red, you want to avoid dangerous metabolites. So over here, we have pesticides, alcohol, high-fat diet interferes with the estrone being moved down to the 2-hydroxy, and that's done by the CYP1A1. If we want to enhance that pathway, we can look at things like DIM, diindolylmethane, which is from cruciferous vegetables, indole 3-carbinol, same thing, exercise, flax, soy, omega-3 fats, and progesterone. So these are things that can support it. When your client is low in magnesium and they have a CYP1B1, they're going to have more of this 4-hydroxyestrone produced. Like, see how you can advise people based on knowing some of these genetics and how you can convince them to do the stuff that you wanted them to do anyway, and just going back and pulling more of a bird's eye view, right? This is the way the pathways look. We have cholesterol going down into pregnenolone. We have all these, cross linkages, but eventually we're making the sex hormones. I just want to mention something because we're going to mention the effects of stress on all of this, on the detoxification, the conjugation, et cetera, of estrogen and the creation of estrogen. This is cortisol. Cortisol is produced when hungry tigers are chasing at your tail. Stress, right? How many people work with clients who are constantly under stress? How many people are under stress all the time, right? You either have kids or a sick mom or, your own situation. So when we have the need for a lot of cortisol, it diverts the precursors, the building blocks down to cortisol, because guess what? Getting away from hungry tigers is more important to your survival than having sex and having babies, right? And your body knows that. And that's why so many people are under constant stress, have low sex drive, have infertility problems, and so many other things, endometriosis and other problems. So we have to keep those in mind. We want to make this nice and balanced. I just put this up here because a lot of people ask me, well, I don't understand it. My client or I, we have low sex hormones, but our cholesterol's high. Why isn't that cholesterol being made into sex hormones? It could be vitamin B5, pantothenic acid, right? Because that's needed for that conversion. So it's just one of the things. Okay? We all good? We going too much into the weeds, or is this interesting? Yes? No? Interesting? Okay. So what are the signs of excess estrogen? Weight gain, heavy periods, fibroids, PMS, fibrocystic breasts, loss of sex drive, fatigue, depression, anxiety, and hormone-sensitive cancers. It's not just the BRCA gene that puts a person at risk for cancer. It's all the rest of these, and I'm going to show you how many more of these are, and I have a gift for you at the end. So signs of excess estrogen in men: gynecomastia, big boobs, right? Boobs that look like female boobs, sexual dysfunction, loss of muscle, fatigue, depression, anxiety, and hormone-sensitive cancers. When we think women, we think breast cancer, endometrial cancer, etc., ovarian cancer. When we think men, we go, oh, prostate cancer. But yes, and the excess estrogen can predispose to prostate cancer, but men get breast cancer too. especially men who have developed that estrogenic appearance and the larger breasts. So I just want to say something because this is a really important point. If you or another practitioner that your client is going to decides this guy has low testosterone and wants his sex drive back, I'm going to prescribe testosterone. You could make the situation worse because there's a particular enzyme called aromatase that supports the conversion from testosterone to estrogen in that pathway that I showed you earlier. So testosterone can get converted down into estrogen. So you can't just willy-nilly give a man testosterone. You can't just willy-nilly give a woman estrogen without looking at metabolites. And I just really want you to see, and I'll show you how to look at metabolites. But if you're not doing this, whether or not they have this high-risk profile genetically, you can get them into trouble because you don't know the metabolites that they're converting to. So if someone's having all kinds of symptoms of menopause and doctor says, oh, here, go on Premarin or go on bioidenticals, but they don't look at the metabolites, they can give somebody these hormones that causes their 4-hydroxy to go higher. And we've seen that. And I'm going to show you an example of that. So very dangerous. All right. So what is the genetic factors? Now we're going to talk about the caffeine. So we have this CYP1A2 detoxifies most of the caffeine. If they have an AA, they are a potentially fast metabolizer. If they have an AC, they're a slow metabolizer. If they're CC, they're definitely a slow metabolizer. And I say definitely with tongue in cheek because it's not, we can't always predict that, right? So it's responsible for more than 95%. I was being, cautious with 85 to 90, more than 95%. And it's found in a cluster with those other two, the 1A1 and 1B1, and I'll show you those two. 34% of the population are slow metabolizers. So it affects the estrogen clearance, which can cause fibroids, tender breasts, and cancer. I have an article, I think I have the quote in it a little further down. There was a doctor, Anita, something or other. And what she said was that most of the tender breasts in women have to do with coffee. Most of the tender breasts. So, and again, the CYP1A2, I just put this back in here to show you where it is. So how does caffeine affect estrogen metabolism? Well, one is by affecting that CYP1A2, diverting it from detoxifying the estrogen. It can deplete B vitamins and magnesium, which are needed to produce progesterone. And when we don't make enough progesterone, we end up estrogen dominant, and that's a problem. It also causes cortisol to increase. How do you think you get all that energy when you drink a cup of coffee? It causes cortisol to be effectively increased on a cellular level. And guess what? That leads to less estrogen, progesterone, and estrogen, and it also leads to increased blood sugar. It blocks adenosine. Adenosine is a chemical in the body that allows us to fall asleep. There's particular receptors in the brain, and it makes it so that you can't fall asleep so well. Most people will say, if I have a cup of coffee after 5 o'clock, I can't fall asleep. Some people who can probably are fast metabolizers, right? So you can guess at their genetics without even knowing. This was shocking to me. It was associated with miscarriage. And this was a study that was done in a prestigious journal. I gave you the article, the full text to the article. Fascinating. So if you have someone who's trying to get pregnant or who has tried to get pregnant and has had miscarriages, you want to make sure that they're off of caffeine. And it increases inflammation, which affects receptors, which affects everything. So those are the things that have to do with estrogen and caffeine. So here's some of the research I found. So the CYP1A2 is most active in catalyzing the 2-hydroxy, which is the protective metabolite, right? So when you are interfering with the function of that 1A2, then what you're going to get is less of the 2, less of the protective. Between 40 and 50% those estrogens, this probably you don't care about, are hydroxylated at a C2, the second carbon position. The higher the CYP1A2 activity was postulated to be associated with reduced risk of breast cancer. So if you're interfering with its function, you're going to have an increased risk of potentially of breast cancer. Caffeine has been used to evaluate the activity. So they have particular tests they go through and they can evaluate how well that enzyme is working. Positively related. So as the CYP activity went up, it was positively related with the insulin and IGF-1. And both of those, when they're elevated, can increase the risk of breast cancer. Now, I wish I could say that all the research was clear, but there's a link to that article that had that in it. So let's talk about it. So they said, okay, does caffeine, it potentially, from a biochemical standpoint, it looks like it could increase the risk of breast cancer. So let's study it. They thought that CYP1A2 may be associated with, they first thought it would be better if we had a higher activity of it. And then they thought it's better if you have lower activity. And now they don't know. Now they're just guessing, right? Because there's no clear correlation when you look at populations. It induces the CYP1A2 activity. Is that good? It makes us need more of that? Or is it bad because it's making us need more because we need more to detoxify this chemical that's coming in? So this is her, Anita Johnson, Chief of Surgery at the Cancer Treatment Centers of America in Atlanta, says the most common culprit in breast pain is coffee. Coffee consumption was classified as possible carcinogen back in 1991, but now it's downgraded to not classified. We can't classify it. We don't know its carcinogenicity. I think that if it's not known to be non-carcinogenic, I don't want to do it. Do you see what I mean? But here's the thing. I just wonder, it was downgraded by the WHO. Maybe somebody paid off the WHO to change its classification, right? Who knows, right? Coffee is a big industry. Big industries have lots of money for lobbyists. So do we know? No, we don't. The evidence from the epidemiological studies is controversial. In my world, if somebody has those SNPs and they have either a red or yellow, homozygous or heterozygous, I want to proceed and err on the side of caution. If I tell them that it might be carcinogenic and I tell them to reduce or eliminate, then what's the risk, right? Other than they're going to be grouchy and hate me because they're missing their coffee and they need their energy. But that's another story, right? But if I err on the side of, well, maybe it's not carcinogenic, right? We don't know. Maybe it's not carcinogenic. And that person, I don't advise that. And then they end up with breast cancer. I'm not going to be very happy with myself, and they might not be happy with me either. Okay. So I just want to make a case for other reasons to advise against coffee consumption. It increases blood sugar and creates sugar and carbohydrate cravings. I notice when people have coffee, they want to have a croissant with it, or a donut with it, or a cookie with it, right? It can cause insomnia and poor sleep, and we know we need sleep for everything. It stimulates, acid reflux. If somebody who has acid reflux, you've got to get them off of coffee because it actually stimulates the release of gastrin, which increases the motility, which increases the stomach acid, and this person can be a problem. It stimulates the release of cortisol, which raises blood sugar, etc., shuts off the digestive tract, can lead to estrogen dominance, which leads to all kinds of problems, the thyroid nodules and fibrocystic breasts and PMS and PCOS and all that. Here's a shocking one. It's a cross-reactive to gluten. If you look at the Cyrex labs, I think it's array 4 that they have, they show coffee as one of the things that can, doesn't mean it does, cross-react with gluten and give somebody the same response as gluten. And it impacts the conversion of T4 to T3. So here we are we're doing this caffeine to try to get more energy, but then we crash, right? Because the levels go down and then we need more. Part of it is T4 to T3 conversion. T3 is the active, right? And it can cause miscarriages. That's, a biggie. And it's highly inflammatory. And there are studies, and I have a list of references you can take a picture of, contributing to osteoporosis. Okay. So here's some of the major genes that we can affect. I didn't put in the CYP1B1 because it basically does estrogen metabolism. It doesn't do any other function. But these are things that we can help protect people with the 1A2, in addition to the caffeine, which we talked about already. It detoxifies acetaminophen and aflatoxin. And aflatoxin is found in peanuts and in some grains, right? It's a fungal toxin. CYP1A1 is responsible for the 2-hydroxyestrone, which is the protective one, and the detox of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PCAs. So here's the thing. Those are found in exhaust fumes, right? So I'll caution people to avoid, pumping gas with the car on. You teach people how to open their windows and let the inside air out. You caution people, if they have an attached garage, to always let the car air out before they shut the door, the garage door. And it's found in charbroiled meat. Okay. So these are things you can caution people about to have better estrogen metabolism, especially if you do some of the tests and you see that they're out of balance. And the CYP3A4, pesticides and certain medications. So cautioning people to only take absolutely necessary medications, but also to eat as much organic food as possible. Same thing with lawn fertilizers and all that. Okay. So I just made a list of some of the detox SNPs related to estrogen. We talked about the CYP1A1. We talked about the 1A2, caffeine and estrogen. We talked about the 1B1, which strictly does the estrogen. We talked about the 3A4, 60% of all known drugs, and it's the most abundant, right? And it metabolizes all the steroid hormones, plus organophosphates, which is pesticides. Grapefruit juice inhibits and milk thistle inhibits in vitro, meaning outside the body in a test tube. And then the glutathione transferase, which is that phase 2 to get rid of the metabolite. So I gave you a list. Please, if you want, take a picture of this if you haven't seen it before. These are nutrients that will speed up phase 1 and slow down phase 1. And if somebody has a sluggish phase 2, sometimes we want to slow down phase 1. Or just a review of methylation. Methylation gets rid of the steroid hormones, right? It gets rid of also dopamine, histamine, phenols, homocysteine, heavy metals, neurotransmitters. And we can support it with these nutrients, with these food-containing nutrients. Choline, get it from avocado, soy, sunflower. Molybdenum, B vitamins, betaine from beets, SAMe, methionine, magnesium, methylfolate, methyl B12, and other methyl donors. Sulfation also gets rid of steroid hormones, cortisol, androgens, and female hormones. Gets rid of xenoestrogens, which are those toxic estrogens you find in dental fillings and plastic bottles and all kinds of places in the environment. And those are hormone disruptors. Phenols, bile acids, some of these things are internal. We're not going to avoid them, right? But we avoid the exposure to the things outside of the body that we can. Acetaminophen, aspartame, bacteria, endotoxins, so we get the dysbiosis handled, and neurotransmitters, okay? Inhibitors of sulfation are nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, too much molybdenum, and too much vitamin B6. And you can support it with these nutrients here, okay? So this estrogen metabolism, I created with the help of Shelley. You helped me with these, right? The estrogen tables. We researched and we came up with 8 pages of estrogen metabolism SNPs. Some of them are those CYPs. Some of them are the BRCAs that you've heard about before. And then some of them are just receptors and all that. There's 8 pages, and we're going to give you the link to that at the end, right? So stay to the end, and we're going to give you the link to that. So daily choices that improve, affect, or diminish the effectiveness of estrogen metabolism, food, toxic exposures, mental status, sleep, and stress. So here are some of the foods that you can identify to help people. They're drinking coffee. Yeah, we can get rid of it, but we can also protect in other ways because a lot of people won't get rid of their coffee. So there's cruciferous vegetables, there's flax seeds, there's fermented soy, key, miso, tempeh. They have natto, they have isoflavonoids in them. Blueberries, raspberries, and strawberries have a lot of antioxidant to help protect. And omega-3 fats reduce inflammation and improve estrogen metabolism. And finally, fiber promotes the elimination of all the excess estrogen. What foods do you want to guide people to reduce or eliminate? Well, alcohol, because it increases the production of estrogen and can increase the risk of breast cancer. Processed foods disrupt the hormone balance and negatively affect estrogen metabolism. High-fat foods, certain kinds of fats, saturated fats, and trans fats can increase estrogen and promote inflammation. Dairy products contain hormones that may increase the levels of estrogen and promote inflammation. Pesticides, they compete for the detox pathways. And now we have caffeine, which competes with the detox pathways. So all of these are things that you can do to help protect people against the negative effects of excess estrogen. I threw this slide in here, take a picture of it. We're not going to really go over it, but it just seemed like we're talking about estrogen dominance. We're talking about this estrogen resistance, right? We talk about insulin resistance. We also have estrogen resistance. And it can happen when we have some of these genetic SNPs. It can also happen when we are taking in too much estrogen, right? Xenoestrogens or, prescribed estrogens, right? And can be damaged to the receptors. That's the inflammation and chemical exposure. And the symptoms you get when you have any kind of hormone resistance is symptoms as if you don't have enough of that hormone, right? Like in insulin resistance, we have a symptom similar to what we would have with not enough insulin. Same thing with estrogen. And there's a few references there. So take a breath. How do you determine what labs may be needed to determine if this person is at risk? Okay, so here's the deal. The wrong testing can lead to a dangerous outcome. If we just test the blood, we test estrogen in the blood, and this person shows up low, and we give them estrogen supplementation, this person can be making a lot of 4-hydroxy and then get into trouble, right? Into too much, and their breasts and their endometrial tissue and all is at risk. I had somebody that worked with us a while back, and she was doing pellets. So she had been doing it, and I said, well, I think you should, when your pellets are done, let's test your estrogens, let's get the metabolites. And she went to the doctor, and the doctor convinced her that she needed to renew the pellets. She did. When we looked at her Dutch test, she was off the charts in 4-hydroxy. And we're like, this is high risk. This is a high-risk profile. She ended up with breast cancer. Did it get caused by the pellets? I don't know. And pellets, they put in and they they're ebb and flow. And in 6 months, they go back down to normal. So if somebody has too much estrogen and they're on pellets, you can't take them out. She tried. They can't take them out. They can't find them and pull them out. So we have to know how to test properly. We have to be able to do a complete functional assessment with the history taking, a physical evaluation, blood chemistry, and then whatever functional lab tests and in-home tests we have. And then, of course, genetic testing. The 3 main ways to test for estrogen are blood, saliva, and urine. Blood is a static at the time. Usually they don't do free. They do the bound, protein bound, so it doesn't really give you an idea of the activity. These are some of the endocrine-related functional lab tests. I love the Dutch test or the 24-hour. Meridian Valley has one that's similar, that's 24-hour, that has the metabolites. Saliva testing is great, but it doesn't give you the metabolites. Cortisol testing, we get to see what other factors. So the rest of these tests are what other factors are influencing. So we have cortisol, the digestion, immune system, fatty acids, amino acids, etc. So let's quickly look at the Dutch test. We're going to do this at our event in June. We're going to go through a lot more detail on this so you really feel comfortable with it. Well, take a look at this. This is the first page, and it just gives you a summary and it gives you cortisol. We're not going to spend any time on cortisol today, but look at this. This person has high estradiol and medium progesterone. So this person is estrogen dominant and high off the charts testosterone. So the questions I ask when I see these numbers, depending on the age of the person, is, are you on hormone replacement therapy? This is the page. I'll show you this a little bit more up close, but we get to see the pathways. So here up here is progesterone. You cannot test progesterone directly because it's just not in the urine for very long, but we test metabolites of it. And then here are the three main estrogens, estradiol, estrone, estriol, and they come downstream to 16-hydroxy and 4-hydroxy. When you're first looking at these tests, you're going to look at this pie chart. You're going to see, oh, that one should be a sliver. The red should be a sliver, and this one is up higher. And I'm going to share with you on the next page a little bit closer up so we can read it better, right? So this should be no more than 11%. The lower, the better, and it's 13%. Higher risk of DNA damage. The 16 is actually pretty good. It's 17%, and we look for it to be like between 13 and 30. This is the one that has mixed. It's a double-edged sword. If we have too little, then we are at risk of bone problems. You know, women are at higher risk of osteoporosis after menopause. It's because this estrogen goes down, and this metabolite is important. And then the 2 is our friend, right? So when we look at this, we can say, oh, this person has this particular SNP. Looks like they also are activating this SNP because this is too high, this is too low. The methylation in this particular case is high. So, and that's just another view of the same kind of thing with the age-related labs in there. But this is what you're going to see when you do a Dutch test. So what do you do with these people? What do you do if they have some of these SNPs? What do you do if they have some of these labs? Well, I always send them pre-consultation forms. I do them online. You can do them on paper. You conduct your initial consultation, determine risk factors, have them do a journal of their daily activities and diet. They have old labs, request old ones. If they need new ones, you request new ones. And then we request any additional assessments, genetic testing, create a customized plan. But the big piece is we've got to coach them to implement the plan and overcome obstacles. Super important. So it's our job to look at what their symptoms are, identify what the underlying problem, the underlying imbalance is, but that's not enough. We need to go deeper into the roots and determine what are the causes of this. What are the causes? So when we're dealing with estrogen, we can't just look at the symptoms up here. This is my pyramid. Many of you have seen this before, but in over 30 years of clinical experience, I find that inevitably, if the sex hormones are out of balance, there's something down below, either in the lifestyle or in one of these other systems. And we're going to look at the gut next because the gut is super important for estrogen metabolism. And there's so many studies on this. So estrogen metabolism, microbiome balance, and gut-related SNPs. When we have out of balance microbiome and we have some of the gut-related microbiome SNPs like FUT2, well, we can get into trouble and we don't want to be in that trouble. So there's a thing, the gut microbiota, it's also called the estrobolome. We'll look at that on another slide, but there's an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. It conjugates or deconjugates. It puts the estrogens back together again and makes them active again. And then we can get into the estrogen dominance, right? So we want to have good intact microflora. So this is an important piece to focus on in anybody with high risk of estrogen-related cancers and also with the symptoms. And that's a link if you want to take a picture. The intestinal microbiome and estrogen receptor-positive female breast cancer. This was a study that they looked at this thing called the estrobolome, which is an aggregate of the enteric inside the gut bacterial genes capable of metabolizing estrogen. And they found that postmenopausal estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer was linked here. The composition impacted by factors that modulate its dysfunctional activity and variations in the composition and activities of the estrobolome. They're looking at that as a potential for how do we cure cancer? How do we prevent cancer? Get the gut in balance. So it's pretty cool research. Here's just a picture. We have the ovaries, adrenals, the adipose tissue, and other places that produce the estrogen. Get the estrogen into circulation. They go through the liver. They become conjugated estrogens. Those are the 2-hydroxy, 16-hydroxy, 4-hydroxy. And then they go into the intestine. They get excreted in the intestine or excreted through the kidneys. Intestinal reabsorption happens when we have more of that beta-glucuronidase, which is affected by the microbiome. So there's a link to that if you want to read the detail. So they play a crucial role by regulating estrogen levels. So it's super important to get the gut in balance when you're first working with people. The estrobiome, I talked about that. The estrobolome modulates that enterohepatic gut to liver circulation. And microbes produce the beta-glucuronidase. So if we have too much of that, we're going to recycle and recycle and recycle and end up with estrogen dominance. And it produces active unbound estrogen, which can go back and affect the estrogen receptors. So diet and lifestyle factors that disrupt the estrobolome. No surprise here, right? Antibiotics and contraceptives, because they affect the gut microbiota. The diet affects it. Too much sugar, too much processed foods, too many foods that have the xenoestrogens, but also the phytoestrogens can improve that. And the phytoestrogens are in some like clover and fermented soy and things like that. Okay, so these are important things. So here's a list. Take a picture. These are all the articles I found on this. I could have just kept going, but there's so much to research on this. And what the bottom line is get the diet under control, get their gut under control, and then you can look at getting their estrogen and adapt. Don't start supplementing with bioidenticals or herbs that increase hormone production until you figure this out and get their gut under control. Okay? So this is just what do you do to personalize your review and note their genetic SNPs. You evaluate for symptoms of nutrient deficiency, do lab tests, educate them on food sources, recommend foods to avoid and herbs to increase. And I gave you that list in here as well. We want to personalize their recommendation. We want to be able to motivate, inspire, and empower commitment to action. But we need to motivate and inspire them. And knowing the genetic tendencies, looking at labs helps us to motivate and inspire people. It's funny how it is. I can say, do this, do this, do this, do this, and it's right on. And they'll go, yeah, until they see the labs and the genes, and they go, oh, yeah, I guess I better do that. You told me that 2 years ago. Yeah,